Okay, so let's get started. So tonight's session main agenda is like optimization. Whenever we start with Angular project or whenever we are working in a industry project, there are some things which we need to take care whenever we are writing the code. So normally what happens like whenever we join any company or any project, every project has certain rules and regulation for while coding. Everyone will call it as a programming practice or standards we have to follow. So whatever I know, because I have already posted in, some of you have already suggested some again things which we need to add. So that I have added it over here. So these things we are going to discuss. So many things are there, but we will need probably 2 sessions to complete this. Whatever we can do in this session, we will try. And we will start with very basic. Okay, so that everyone, like if you are a fresher or if you are an intermediate or expert also, you can have an idea. Okay. Now, so the project I will be using is this e-commerce application. So chain detection I will take at the end. First, variable declaration. So let's say this component is empty. So I'm taking this. So when we create the variable, so while creating variable, we should provide the access specifier also. Now, what do we mean by access specifier is private or public. So those who are from the backend, they understand access specifier very clearly, like what is the meaning behind that. But those who are only limited to Angular or React, so they might not have that much idea, like what is access specifier. So it's like providing or what is the accessibility of that particular state or the variable you are defining. So let's say in this component, I'm creating a variable, let's say first name colon, let's say I give the string variable is equal to something Angular. So what I have created a state or a variable in my this particular component. So by default, when this variable I have created like this, so I can access this variable in my HTML also. So in interpolation, see, I'm able to access it. Okay. So this, whenever we create a variable by default, if we don't specify anything, so by default, this variable is public, means above outside this class also mean in our HTML, we can access it. But let's try to create one more variable with private now. So private, let's say course name colon data type string is equal to React JS. Fine. So I have created one more variable, but now I have created variable with private access specifier. Now, if I try to access this variable, so while compilation mode only, I will get the error. See, property course name is private, only accessible within the class. Means whenever you create a variable with private, that variable I can use it in this class only, not outside the class, not in the HTML of that component also. Now this is very basic, but why? So whenever we normally write the code, we normally don't consider this of writing or right, because it's not going to hamper anything or it's not going to be related to performance as we think. But yeah, see, if you are not providing private, and when what will be the variable which you will create private? So let's say you are creating a variable which you are going to use into component.ts only. You are not going to use that variable in the HTML to bind anywhere. So rather than making it public, you should make it private. So obviously there is a performance bind with this concept when you are declaring any variable or the state with public. So by default, Angular is what we can say providing some accessibility so that it can be accessible in the HTML also, right? But if you make it private, so you know that this variable you are not going to use in the HTML. So it has that private accessibility, right? So this is the first point. Whenever you are creating variable, if you know that variable, whatever you are going to declare is going to be used in HTML, then only you can make it like this also, or you can write the public also. That is also same thing. But if you know that your variable is not going to be used into your .html, it just you are going to use in some functions, so you can make that variable as private. So this is the first point. Just like in the variable, we have public and private. Same thing we have in the variable functions also. Let's say get full name, round bracket, curly bracket. So by default, this is public. So I can use this. Click event, right? So I'm able to access this event. Now let's create another event, get square. And to this function, I will make it private. Now, if I try to access this, get square over here, again, I will get the error. Okay. So just like in while declaring the variable, we can make use of the public and private. Same thing we can do in while declaring the function also. Now, we all know there are tons of the functions we create which are only limited to the .ts. Not every function or not every method we write, we call it in the HTML, right? So instead of making all the functions available across the HTML, make the function also private, right? So if you are working in a, let's say from mid MNC to MNC, every project has these guidelines, right? But if you are in your project is the review system or the PR is properly getting reviewed, then you will get the what we can say validation review comments like that, like please make variable private and public, right? But in so many projects, like if project is like that, deadlines are very short, so no one is going to focus on these small things. But when your project is so big now, these small things will also affect your what do we say, speed of the application. It's a small thing. If your project is small now, these things are not going to hamper anything. But if your project is very big, right? So these small things also affect your performance of the application. So that's why when the project is properly set up, you have a proper dedicated architect who is monitoring your code now, then these are the guidelines you have to follow. Otherwise, your PR won't get approved. Or if your project has Sonar enabled, these are the things that are going to be coming in the small code smell also. Ultimately, you have to fix it, right? So doesn't matter what kind of a project you have, make sure you are handling this. These are the habits you should These are the habits you should apply. Okay, fine. So while declaration of the variable or the function, you can make the variable private and public. Now, let's say this is the function and this function, or let's try another component, create order. Now in this function, let's say this function. So now from Angular 17, if you have TS-lint or some tools already installed in your VS Code now, so when you create the function, you by default get this void. So what is the meaning of this void? If your function is not returning anything, so whenever you are creating a function, if your function is not returning anything, you should provide the return type of that function as void. So void, when you are going to use, if your function is not going to return anything. So in that case, you can make it as a void. Okay. Now, let's say I will create a function. So let's say get sum of two number. And this function is going to have two parameters. Let's say num1 colon number, num2 colon number. And I'm going to return num1 plus num2, right? So now if you hover on that, you know the return type of it. But yeah, by default, if we hover on that TypeScript, we TypeScript compiler check the return type and it will add it. But you have to properly write it also. Like you know what kind of a data this function is going to return. So just simply provide the return type also, right? So if function is not going to return something, you can keep it as a void. But if you know that your function is going to return something, so you can make it whatever the data, whether it is returning observable, whether it is returning string, object, or whatever. So you just have to provide the data type. But let's say based on the condition, sometimes you are returning object or sometimes you might return array. In that case, you can have any because that is the dynamic data type we have. But whenever you create a function, always you should provide the data return type also. Fine. So this is the second thing. This we have covered. Let me just add it also because I will be sharing this. Add return type functions. Okay. Now, the next point is read only. Let's say in a function or in a service, we are creating a variable, or let's use the service now. So now in this service, I have created a variable which is storing some my API URL. This is a normal variable. We know, like, let's say in a particular function, if we create a local variable by using const, let's say const URL is equal to something I'm assigning. So when we create a variable using const, we cannot reinitialize that value by using assignment operator, right? We cannot do this. Okay. So this is because we don't normally create the variable globally by using let and const. So whenever we create the variable globally on this level, but if we have to make this variable as a constant, so in TypeScript, we have read only. Okay. So now this variable is kind of a read only. Now in from our this service, we cannot change the value. Okay. So if I try this dot API URL is equal to something. So see, I'm getting error because we have said like this is a read only property. Okay. So if you know you are going to create some variable and doesn't matter like that variable you are going to create in a service or in a component or any directive or pipe anywhere, but that value is not going to be changed or you don't want that value to be get changed. So you can add a read only property over here. Fine. So many of the guys like whenever we face the interview question, normally we don't get more question asked in respect to TypeScript because everyone knows like while working in Angular, almost projects are very TypeScript is like the default language we get in Angular. But actually, we don't use all the things whatever there are in the TypeScript. So many things are there in the TypeScript, which makes the TypeScript language more OOPS-oriented support, right? But we don't use those all things which are there in the TypeScript in Angular, right? So these are some things. So whenever some interviewer might be or some projects might be there who use TypeScript properly, right? So in that project, you might face question like this. So you should have, or while working also, if you try to use this now, you don't have to prepare it while interview also, because you know and you are writing it, the code, it should be written. Fine. So this is the read only. Then enum. So enum is like, we know like enum, whenever we have to, let's say overall the project, we want to store, use something which is going to be used overall the project. So what we normally do, we create a constant. Constant is like, you have to store some data, right? And that data you are going to use it everywhere in the application. But a parallel way to use something common data, another way is to use the constant also. Okay. Now we have it over here. Constant. Yeah. So constant is already there. So here I will create an enum. Okay. So enum, let's say product status. How do we do that? Directly, no? So let's say active value will be, let's say 0. How do we declare that? I also forgot because, okay, equal to. Or let's say active, deactive, or out of stock. Okay. Now let's say this is an e-commerce application. So in our e-commerce application, product can have 3 types of status. And from API, we are going to get either 0, 1, or 2 in the product API. But on .NET side or on Java side also, they create the enum. So in their enum, it might be like that, like 0, 0 will denote active, 1 will denote deactive, and 2 will denote out of stock, right? So let's say if we have to write the code, like if product is active or product is deactive. So how we can write let's say in the create order component, I will be writing like, so if order object, let's see what data we have in the order object dot, I don't have that property, but let's say sale ID is the property we have, and in the sale ID we might get status. Okay, so let's say I need to write a code checking that if product is active or deactive or out of stock. Just like that, I need to write the code. So if we don't have the enough, what we would have written like that. So if this dot product object order object dot, let's say sale ID I'm just considering, is equal to 0, means product is active. Or else if we will be writing for another case, is equal to 1. Okay, so like this we will write the code, but this is kind of a hard code thing. So let's say after some time API has changed their status code, like instead of 0, 1, 2, we might be getting something else. But if you have hard coded like this value, and in all the overall project you have written code regarding the product status with this hardcore thing. So if API team change something, whatever the status they are going to send, they have changed something. So everywhere, wherever we have done the hardcore thing, we have to rewrite our code. But rather than doing hard code, if you have stored the whatever the statuses you have in your constant file, so what you can do, you can directly use that, and a single place you will have that value. So how you will use, instead of this product status, we just need the import. Why it's not suggesting? Export. Now it is suggesting product support for active. Okay, so see, instead of using it hard code, we can make use of this also. Now this is same as the constant, what we used to do like that. Okay, but whenever we talk about enum, so enum has very limited use case. But if you have 1, 2, 3, 4 values, let's say what we can count, limited number of information is there, and you are going to get some 0, 1, 2 value. Some enums are like that, or one more type is like export enum product availability, or let's say product code active, deactive, out of stock. So see, this enum we have created where properties have some value also. Okay, and this enum we have created where we don't have the property value. Now just understand properly. There are some requirement, or so there are some scenarios in the while working in the actual project where we might get some integer value. Let's say in your object you have certain field where you might be getting some 1 or 2 or 3, some dedicated number of integer value. Okay, now if you have to write a code like that, so you can have a instance like this, and this active will be considered as 1 or 0. We will check it, deactive and out of stock. Okay, so here we have specified the value. Instead of this, we can have a string value also. This is enum where we have provided the value also. But if you don't provide the value, it will, what we can say, access it or operate it as a integer value. Okay, let me just showcase you that. If sale ID is equal to product code dot active. So, and in sale ID, if we have 0, so this is active is the first element. See here it is saying 0 because this is the first element. Okay, else if it will access all the enum properties by its index, active then deactive. So here you can see 1. Got it? So there are scenarios where you have to create enum with some value also, but sometimes, let's say, I'm not getting the exact same we have in project, but just consider there are scenarios where from the API in particular object, you might get 0, 1, 2 values, just what we can count up to max 10, right? So in that scenario, we create it as like this also without any value. Okay. So enum is also that much important as we use the constant. Okay. So constant we go like where we have to store multiple some data kind of thing. But this is not actually data. This is just to, instead of while writing any code where we do hard code values, instead of that hard code, we are storing the values over here. And we can write the code by using the enum values. Got it? Let me just unmute. Yes, so you can unmute. Any questions till now? So we have covered our 4 point. And this is also one of the example. Let's say rules are there and we need to check like what type of rules we have. So if we have enum like this, we can write the code like that also. Here I have specified 1, 2, 3, but we can have value also stored. Got it? Anyone has any question? Otherwise we can move ahead. Okay, I will consider as no. Now, so the next point is optional chaining or nullishing coalescing, what we call as a null check or something. Okay. Now for this, let's use my order component. Now in my order component, I will create an object. Let's say student obj. Just going with any for now. And inside that, let's say we have name property, something value will be there. Address will have another object. There we can have address. Line 1, it will have some value. City, something, state. Okay. Now consider like we have object like this. Now, whenever we are trying to access the value of, let's say, address or city, so whenever either you are trying to access this value in the HTML, so let's say we have to print the city, but city is in my address. Okay. So how do we access is like student object dot address dot then our property name, whatever the inner property name we have, that we access like this. Okay. So this is normally we write. Okay. But those who are actually working, they might know. So address is a kind of an inner object. But sometimes what happens from the API response we get, like this is kind of a response we get. But sometimes this address can be null. Okay. Other detail you might get, but some address can be null. But whenever you are trying to read something from an object, let's say city is in my address, but if address is null, just save and check if we will get the error. Create order, what we did wrong. My order URL is created or not. Yeah, it is there. Let's put some value Pune into it. So now you can see here we got the value, because while creating only object, we have provided the value also. But let's say this address doesn't came from the object. Address is not present, or from the API, whatever the API call you are doing, and from API you didn't get that address field from the API. Okay. So now your code will break. Let's say, let's open the inspect. So see, what is the error? Cannot read properties of undefined reading city. So wherever we are trying to read the city, from whatever we are reading the city, that is undefined, right? Because from in our student object, we didn't get the address. Okay. because so many APIs are like that. Sometimes you might get this property, sometimes you might not get, because it is a condition based, right? So how do we, and some APIs like will be, you will get the field, but it will be null or undefined. But some APIs are like that all the fields are also dynamic. Sometimes you will get address, sometimes you won't get the address. So we need to, whenever we are accessing a property from inner child, so you need to add a null check also. So now currently we are getting a console error. So how do we handle that? By checking the null. So you can just add a question mark over here. So let's see. So now you can see the code is not breaking because this won't execute unless this object is not null or undefined. This, whatever the code you have written, it won't execute. Got it? So this is what null check everywhere we are, whenever we are working in the HTML template, inner child or inner object, whatever you are trying to read, always add a null check. Okay. If address, student address is undefined, see, if let's say this is undefined or we didn't initialize this like this. Okay. So still we are getting, still it is getting breaking on the address, because this only is object is there, means by default it is undefined. So we cannot read something from the undefined. That's why student object and the student object is undefined. So we cannot read something from the undefined. So here also you need to add. So it's not just the inner object. Everywhere, wherever you are using the dot operator and you are trying to read the value, how do you know like this value is going to be there? There might be scenario like from the API you don't get the value, and without checking it you are assigning it something, right? So everywhere, wherever you are trying to use the dot operator to read the property value, make sure you add the null check. Got it? So this is we do in the HTML. Now same thing we have to write in the code as well. So let me just undo, or let's create a constructor. Now, whatever the null check we have added in the HTML, same null check we can add it in the .ts also. So let's say if condition is there, so what we have to write? First, if student object is not defined, then and sorry, this dot. So this is like checking like this object is not undefined. Then student dot address. Second check, checking like if address is not null. Then we can access, let's say constant city is equal to this dot student address dot city. So if student object is not undefined, then it will check this condition. And then if address is also not undefined, then it will go inside. So whatever we have written it over here, same thing of check, we need to add it in the .ts also. Clear? Now, while working in the HTML, so let's say we have, let's say in so many applications, we have a read-only mode. Okay, so those who don't know read-only, let me just explain. So let's say you have a employee creation page. We have a component which is responsible to insert the employee. We will have all the form element, everything. In some application, you will have a read-only page also. Let's say guest user is there and who is going to use our application. So he has only the read-only access. So it will be only key value pair data, just the label and the value, label and the value. That is the read-only mode. Okay. But let's say we are trying to display the city. Okay. So now in the object, we have the city data. So it is visible, properly working. But let's say if we don't have the data visible, or let's say we don't have the address. So now after city, we just have empty. If we just consider from the user perspective, user is using this application, and after city, we don't have anything. So this doesn't look good, correct? We need to show like hyphen hyper or not available, something we need to show. So this also we can cover it in the HTML. So let's say student, then and then student object, whatever we have written it over here now, just like this if statement, we can write it over here also. Dot address again and if both are okay, then this, we miss something. Student object, then student object dot address, student, okay, this question. Then we don't need this also question mark, because we are double checking, like it is, if it is this student object is not undefined, then only this piece of code is going to execute. If this is not undefined, then only this piece of code is going to execute. So we don't need that null check also. Okay. If everything is fine, or instead of writing it over here, or here we can write empty check also, because sometimes let's say not empty, city can be empty also. In your object, city will be there, property name will be there, but it will have the value empty. So if it is empty, still it is going to say show like this, but we need to take care of that also. So then if it is not equal to empty, then you will print this, or you will print hyphen hyphen, or any whatever your project requirement is, like that. So now this will handle, like from API, if you get the proper data, you will display the data. But if it is not there, like if city is empty or address is not there, or even the object is also undefined, so you will print hyphen hyphen. So let's just, yeah, it is already there. So now hyphen hyphen is there. So now whatever the user is using, he will get to know, like, yeah, city is not coming from the, city might not be there or something. Okay. So whenever we are working on the read-only pages, so we need to write code like this. Okay. Clear all? Anyone has any question? So this is null check. Null check is very important whenever in reactive form, wherever you are using dot operator. In reactive form, we use controls, right? So whenever you are trying to this dot form dot controls, always add a null check and dot. Okay. Because in your company, your PR might not be getting reviewed properly, but in all the proper project, wherever we have proper team structure and everything, everywhere PR get checked properly. Okay. And if you don't have practice, or if you are not following this strategy while writing in your current project also, na, somewhere you, because in interview also we do the machine test, right? So these things will make you a good developer, or it will represent that you know everything. Okay. Even though machine test is a small CRUD application, so you can cover all these things also. Fine. Yeah. What is the question? How we can check ng for to null check now? So let's say we have an array. Let's say city list colon any, or let's say it's a string array. That's it, we have said. Or instead of, it will ask us to initialize also. So let's make it any. Let's say from an API, we are going to get the city list. Okay. We might have a function, and whatever the data we get, that we are going to store it over here. But what is the guarantee that from your API, you are going to get the data, right? So what we can do, let's say we are using UL or LI. Now on LI, we have ng for. So star ng for, and over here, city list we will pass. Okay. Let's try to save. Okay, this is Angular. Right, common. So now this array is, we have just created a variable. It doesn't have any data. So by default, it will be undefined. And here we are trying to use ng for on the undefined variable. So let's see. So it is not breaking anything. Okay. Now let's try to print something. Someone asked me this question. It's not breaking. Or let's say initialize object. Yeah. Okay. So someone just recently asked me this, like he was getting error like this. So we get this error if we are using ng for, and whatever the value we are passing, it is having object. So ng for requires array, right? So we cannot use ng for on the array, right? So that's why this kind of error you will get. Cannot differ object. ng for only supports binding or something. Or while declaring only, we have initialized this an object. But let's say from API, while declaration, we didn't do anything. But from API, we get it undefined or something and we stored it. Or from API, we got array, object instead of array. And we have a code on this variable with ng for. Okay. So if in your variable, you have object and you are trying to iterate it, you will get something error like that. Cannot bind ng for off since it is known property of button. This kind of error you might get. Or ng for off. So if your project is in Angular 18, so ng for off won't be recognized because you need to import the common model. So there are two cases. Either you are trying to use the ng for on the object or you don't have common module imported. Okay. These are the possible scenarios where you get that ng for off error. Okay. Now, coming back to our question, like how do we check it? Like, so let's say city array has the elements or not. So here, instead of writing like this, what we can do, we can import, we can add ng container. So ng container has a right way like this. So wherever we have to write, wherever we have to check before like item is there, means like above in above scenario also, whatever the code we have written it over here, this also we can put it on a ng container. Okay. So here what we can do, ngIf is equal to if city list dot length, or if first like city list is there and city list dot length not equal to 0. And inside this ng container, we will have our li. So before ng for gets invoked, we have the check, we have it checked already. So this kind of ng container check we add in case of ng for or ng also. And here also, instead of doing like this now, we can use this also. Instead of writing like over here, we can write, we can make use of the ngIf also. Or another way to do this, city colon, let's use this span tag, star ngIf, the condition, this, and here I will create a template. See, not here, we'll put the hash value, array, here, I will pass it this. Okay, so just see. So first scenario, in the interpolation only, we have hard coded everything. All the condition I have written. And if this all condition gets satisfied, then only I will be printing the value. Otherwise, I will have this. Okay. But let's say instead of this hyphen hyphen, you have NA or not available, something major text is there, not available. Now, let's say you have around 50 labels like this. And everywhere, if you are not using like this, everywhere you are going to have, let's say not available over here. Okay. So let's say you have 50 labels in your component and everywhere you are going to repeat this code, right? Everywhere, wherever you have the label, this kind of code will be there. Properties will be different, but if property is not there, you will be printing not available. But this is kind of a repeating thing, right? Okay. But let's say after you have completed your task, you have delivered it onto some environment also, then client said, instead of not available, I need something else value. So everywhere you are going to use, you need to change it. But a right way to do this is you can create an ng template, whatever the extra thing, if value is not there, whatever you need, you can put it over here, and then that you can use it over here as an else block. and here like ngIf is there. So if all the conditions are proper, we will print the value in the span tag. Okay. But if any of the condition is not true, it will render this ngTemp. Okay. So this is the normal way we code. If you have one or two things, you just want to means you just have to type check now. This is also fine. But let's say you have so many fields where you need to write the conditions like this. So ngTemp, create an ng template, and then you can pass it in the else block. This is the right way we normally use. Okay, so I have explained this also and this also. Clear, everyone? Any questions? Okay, so this is done. Now, the next point is we use ngIf. Okay, so whenever we use ngIf, we let's say you have a condition like is boolean false. Okay, so we have created a boolean variable and we are going to have false or true value. If this variable is true, star ngIf. If this variable is true, let's say student is active or something, we will print. If it is false, we will show like student is deactive. Okay. So if there are only two conditions or two possible scenarios, so we can go for ng. But let's say we have multiple conditions, means instead of true and false, we have some, let's say, number of days also, right? So day name, string, and here we can have at least MON starts from Monday, Tuesday, like that something. So here are many use cases are possible. We can have Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, like that. So here, if you just have to show the data where multiple conditions are there. So writing in ngIf condition like this, like if day name is equal to MON, you will display Monday. Then another if case, then Tuesday, Wednesday. So this is going to work fine. Okay, because any one condition is going to execute and that is going to that particular p tag is going to render. But if we think from an Angular perspective or the performance issue, so instead of writing multiple ngIf, if we have scenario like that where we have to write multiple if statement, instead of writing like this, we should use switch case, because switch case we know like particular case is going to be executed and remaining case it won't check also, or particular the case which is going to execute which is going to be true, that case only it is going to execute. Okay, so let's say we have five or seven ngIf statement like this. So what it is going to do, it is going to evaluate this, then it is going to evaluate this also. Wherever you have written the ngIf, all the element ngIf is going to execute, right? But if you have switch case, it's not like all the test cases it is going to evaluate. So execution time will be less in case of switch case. Okay. So instead of using ngIf, if you have multiple conditions that needs to be checked, always go for the switch case. Fine. Again, whatever we discuss with ngIf, same thing will go in the @ if also. If you have @ if, obviously it is going to execute or it is going to evaluate all the conditions. But if you have switch case @switch, okay, it is going to execute that particular statement. So make sure instead of ngIf and if, you will go for the switch case. Normally we don't use switch case that much, okay, but from a performance perspective, we have to go for a switch case only. Okay. So this was the next point. Then a small point is there. Let's say we have to create a text box. Okay, let's create a text box. And we have a button. So if on the button click, on this button click, I want to get the value of this text box. Okay. On button click, I want to get the value of the text box. So what we normally do, we create a variable, right? And that variable, we will bind it to this text box, or we can create an ng model or on input change on this text box, and we will pass the parameter, and then we will cache that parameter into some function, and then we will store it into a variable. There are only possible ways, either using ng model or by on change of this value, on change of the text box, we will pass the text box value by $event dot event dot target dot value. We will pass the current value. These are the possible ways, but it is going to need unnecessary that variable. So instead of that, we can make use of the template value, template variable what we can create. Okay, so that means what you can do, you can just provide a template value. Let's say name. Okay, and on click of this button, click field value. We can pass this template variable over here. Let's create this function. Good. So here, event, let's try to print it, dot target. Directly we are passing the that element access. So see, in event.value, we get the text box value. Okay, so this is interview question which they will ask you without creating any variable or without using ng model. How do we read the text box value? So by creating template variable, we can do them. Got it? So what if you have, there are, whenever you are working on a proper project now, there are many scenarios where we need the text box value or something like that, but we don't have to create, we don't have to store that variable, and we are not going to use that anywhere. So instead of, because in many projects now, whenever you create a variable, you need to justify that also, like why you created this variable. Without creating that variable was not any other way that you could have completed that task or something, right? So we have so many scenarios where instead of creating variable also, we just need a text box value on particular button click or drop down change, right? So this is also a way by which you can get the element value. Okay, so but just provide a template variable to that element, and you can pass, well, let's say this is a button click, or if you have a drop down change event, wherever you need to pass, you can just pass the record. It's like document dot getting the DOM instance value. Okay, so you can get the value of that particular input element like this, event dot value. Fine. So this is also another way, and template variable. So by doing this, you will be able to understand what is the template reference variable also. Okay. Fine. So now remaining things are like it will need proper time. So these were all the basic thing. Now the nursing pipe, unsubscribe, remove duplicate API call. These are very what we can say very scenario based. So I will create this on in this project only. I will create the scenarios first, because we need to remove duplicate API call or avoid unnecessary API calls. Let's say we have a table, and on that table we have a delete button, and on click of delete, we are calling one API, and one API success, we get it something like 201 or something, 204 something we get, means stating like record got deleted. But in case in delete subscribe, we again call the get API, so that we have to remove the element from, we will get the updated record. But instead of doing that, Instead of making that API call also, you can just remove the particular element from your array also. So just like there are various scenarios where we can remove unnecessary API calls. Okay. So these are the scenarios which we will take it in the next session. Again, catching, track by, what is the actual use of ngIf destroy, loader, share reply. Okay. So these things we will do in the next session. Okay. So till now, anyone has any question, you can just go ahead. Let me just stop the recording.